Hello, everyone. Welcome to Welcome Change. This week, this is our hour where the world connects to you. Excuse me, our weekly news hour where we connect you with the world's social entrepreneurs to discuss timely topics. My name is Kennedy Atlan. We're thrilled to see so many of you joining from the Motion Light Lab and the Gallaudet communities, as well as Ashoka's global community.
I'm honored to be here today with Melissa Malzkuhn.
Great job, Kennedy.
Thank you. In Washington, D.C. She is...
So nice to see you sign that. Good job.
Thank you. Well, I'm honored to be here today with Melissa Malzkuhn in Washington, D.C. She is the founder and creative force behind the Motion Light Lab that she'll be telling us more about in a few minutes. But before we start, I wanted to start off with a few quick reminders. One, we'd love to hear your questions during these Welcome Change sessions, so please feel free to drop those into the Q&A and at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end of the conversation. As you'll also see in the chat, we also have subtitles today, so please feel free to use them by clicking more at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're grateful to be joined as well by Lynette and Jin, who will be our interpreters today. So now we are going to kick off with about 30 minutes together. So let's go ahead and get started, Melissa. Thank you again for being here.
My pleasure. Happy to be here with you. I think this will be a fun conversation. And I really am so excited to have seen you practice your intro in ASL. That's really cool to have done that. It's amazing.
Thank you. It's been fun. But I think one really exciting and timely topic that I'd love to get into is kind of reflecting on, I think, the increasing deaf representation we're starting to see in the media. And I think really coming off of this week's Oscars, even seeing Sound of Metal getting nominated, seeing Crip Camp be a documentary nomination, seeing Marlee Matlin present, and then, of course, seeing a deaf actor in Kong vs. Godzilla, which recently came out. So I think it's been a really exciting thing to see. But I would love to hear from you in the midst of this upheaval and rising of deaf representation. What do you think our audience today should know about deaf culture as we continue to see more of it?
I should start out by saying that I agree that lately there has really been an uptick in deaf representation on TV and entertainment in general. I think that the media landscape is undergoing a greater change right now. Social media platforms as well. People's voices are being heard. There's more people in the room. And so there's more ways to connect and to follow deaf actors and actresses. So I think that social media has played a huge role in that. And I think that this is a really exciting time for people. I think in general, people have a real curiosity about ASL and deaf people, deaf experiences. I mean, sign languages and deaf culture are, of course, tightly interconnected. And so I think as people start to get interested in American Sign Language, they start to learn more about deaf people, deaf history, deaf culture. I look forward to seeing more and more stories come out from deaf writers and from deaf teams, deaf creators. And I think that what we see so far is a good start. I mean, honestly, I feel like what we've seen so far is just scratching the surface of the talent that's out there. It's really a vast culture. And also, to me, there is no one singular deaf experience. There are multiple deaf experiences. People as deaf people have their own journeys. Family context plays into that, background, geography, etc. So every deaf experience is multi-layered and individual. And I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see more perspectives. But it's definitely an exciting time for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think speaking of perspectives and also seeing the relationship between hearing communities, deaf communities, and that bridge continuing to get built, I think that's one thing that you do expertly. And I would even say you're a pioneer in really allowing and providing spaces for deaf creatives, deaf technologists, deaf genius really to kind of emerge and succeed. And I think you've done that in a few different ways. So I think before I ask you my next question, I want to plug an award that you are up for. So Melissa has created, in addition to Motion Light Lab, has created the ASL app, which is actually up for a Webby Design Award. And we'll be putting that link in our chat today. So please make sure you are going to vote for Melissa. We'd love to see her win a Webby. Melissa, anything you want to mention on the Webby Award before I ask you the next question?
Oh, I just want to say that I am so excited. I was honestly so surprised to be notified that we were up for it. I mean, of course, I've heard of the Webbies, the best of the internet, for a while now. And when they reached out to us and expressed interest in the ASL app, I just couldn't believe it. And the ASL app has its own story and its own journey. I started it with 3 other people. So 4 of us worked on the ASL app, and our goal was really pretty simple. We just wanted to teach anyone who was interested in like immediate conversational communication that they could have access to it. So we were thinking of people like, you have a neighbor who's deaf, or you are going into a place where there's a barista who's deaf. You want to be able to do a little more than gesture. And so that was what we wanted, was for people to feel confident with that first hello, and then see where that would lead, just to, help grease the wheels of relationship making in people's communities. And we created this app. We wanted, again, just to create access for people to make connections. So that was our very simple intention, and the app really took off. And it's been really well received. And now to be at the point where it's gotten the level of recognition of being up for a Webby Award, that's been incredible. So yes, I hope we get lots of votes. And I think that the votes really are a way for people to get their voices heard and see what the people's choice really is. So let's see how well connected our community is. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. So be sure to download the ASL app. Be sure to vote for the Webby Award. And I think the other organization and program that we wanted to highlight, of course, is Motion Light Lab, which is how you were connected to Ashoka. And so I'd love to start by asking you to tell us more about Motion Light Lab and why you created it and what its origin story is.
Sure. So let's see. The lab has really come a long way now from where it began. So in its very first inception, it came from a place of need. There were several of us that felt there was a real need. This was, man, wow, time really flies. This was back in it's about almost a decade ago now, 9, 10 years ago. Me and a couple other people on campus at Gallaudet, a couple colleagues, had talked about our interest in seeing the ways in which technology could integrate with storytelling, from cultural stories from a deaf perspective, our visual experiences, just ways in which we could create that intersection of technology in our stories. But we didn't have a space to really explore this kind of creativity, a space just to experiment, and a space to bring people together to start exploring this. So that's the need that we identified. So we started this informal gathering. This is the very beginnings of ML2. And it was sort of like imagine like a brown bag lunch thing, where a couple of us on campus would get together. And then as we talked about it more, we decided to get more formalized. We applied for a grant. We got it. That meant we had to take ourselves more seriously and get more formal. But it really was still being driven by this curiosity, fun, being bold. Because technology is new, and as new things come out, you don't know exactly how to use these new technologies. You have to learn by doing. And so we really embraced that spirit of learning on the fly, trying things out, and creating a safe space for anyone of any age on campus to come and try out these new technologies and storytelling. So those were sort of like the founding principles or the founding goal. And now I'll fast forward a little bit from those very early days. We started out with that spirit. Then we got one grant after another, and the lab became even more formally established. And so we have been around in our current inception for about 6-7 years, and everyone on the team is just incredible. They work on a range of projects. We started out by making bilingual storybook apps, which we still make, and everything that those storybook apps are made on are driven by research done by VL2, which is the Visual Language and Visual Learning Center. That's the center that we're housed within. They do research on how deaf children learn to read through a visual modality, and that's their central question. So we developed and designed our storybook app in this research-based way of taking what the research shows and using that to inform our design to make the storybook app so that deaf children can have access to high quality storybooks through an app. So we still remain focused on bringing together stories and technology and creating talent. So now I'm also excited to say that we've turned our attention to even more emerging technologies like virtual reality, augmented reality, and the biggest part of this new work is creating fluently moving 3D motion capture avatars. So fluent signing avatars. This is a brand new area of work. It's groundbreaking in a lot of ways. And by no means am I doing it alone. I truly do have a fantastic team around me. Just some of the best folks, and they're great to work with. So in a nutshell, that's the Motion Light Lab.
Thank you. And before I continue, I want to remind everyone that you are also allowed to ask questions. So please be sure to put those in the Q&A and we can get to those at the very end. But Melissa, there's so many different places we can go based on what you just said. But I think one area that I'd love to explore more is just the intersection, I think, between technology, the arts, language, and all of these elements that you're bringing together. I'd love if you could talk a little bit more about that and how storytelling is really that kind of defining pillar and why storytelling is so important and how you're able to bring all of those different perspectives into storytelling.
Sure. I love your questions, Kennedy. How do I begin to answer that? I think a lot of how we work and just sort of how we are, like even I reflect on my childhood and adolescence. I grew up in the Bay Area, and a key part of deaf culture was storytelling. And so my school would have events, the community would host events where you would have really renowned storytellers come in and put on shows. And as a very young kid, I would go to events like these. My own grandfather actually is known as one of these renowned storytellers in the deaf community. And as a kid, especially, that was just a captivating experience to get to watch a story told live and to have access to that art. I mean, sign languages are visual, and because our language doesn't have a written form, it has to remain visual. And the only way to do that is to capture it on film. But when I think back on all those events that I went to, I think now about one of the coolest challenges before us is how to document visually told stories and how to make them available still in a visual format so that you're getting a direct language model. That in and of itself is really powerful. And research shows that young deaf children absolutely need rich language environments, rich ASL exposure. The more they see, the greater their language foundation is to then later develop fluency in any language and develop their literacy. So these really are fundamental building blocks that we're creating. And our storybook app was also designed on these same principles. So one of the modes that the storybooks are available in is watch mode. So that's where you just watch the story getting told. You've got great animation behind the live action narrator. So you see all of this art in the background. All of that's done by deaf artists, by the way. And then we also have a mode called read mode, which is structured more like a traditional storybook. You actually turn the pages on your tablet. So you see the ASL in the video, and then you also see the English at the bottom of the screen. I'm just thinking through the other projects that we're working on and the ones that are coming up and the ones that we've recently completed and just thinking about what to mention. I guess overall, a common thread is that we always are working to amplify stories told in ASL. And then we also try to make sure that we're really focusing on different parts of the language. We have a construction called classifiers. The way that we use our facial expression for punctuation is really important, so we emphasize those. And we also recognize that parents who have deaf children are also a part of our audience, and we want to make these apps sort of a learning tool for them too. So we want to make the experience enjoyable for all ages. And yeah, I agree with that line of thinking. Like, how do we remember things so well? And part of it is through stories. We really remember stories. That's what sticks. And that's true whether you're a kid or an adult. And so, how do we bring those experiences to young children?
Absolutely. I reflect on my own childhood all the time when I think of your work and how much I think I would have benefited from the Storybook app. And so I'm just so happy and excited to know that there's a new generation of deaf children that are receiving this technology and families that are receiving this access as well. We're receiving a lot of really good questions, so I want to flip there and then we can kind of come back and forth between mine and the audiences. But we have someone who is based in Miami, Florida. They're a deaf accessibility and inclusion specialist, and he's curious to know more about what we need to do to fill in the gap that allows us collectively to bring your technology into the mainstream sooner rather than later. It's a big question, but I think it's a great one.
Great. I saw the same question in the Q&A. That's a good question. I do have some answers to that very question. So I look at what we create as tools. So we design them based on research. It informs how we generate these tools. And one of the tools that we've made is actually called the VL2 Storybook Creator. This is a template that is available free of charge. Anyone can download it, and then you can use the Storybook Creator to plug in your own stories, your own video and text to make your own storybook apps. We also have a training program if you want a more intensive learning experience, but you can just download the Storybook Creator and then start to make a story. But if you take the training, then you'll also learn things like from storyboarding, all the technology, and you learn skills like editing, scanning, exporting, app building, all of the tech stuff that happens behind the scenes. So you learn that entire process through that training. So if this is something that you're thinking about, I'd suggest that you check that out. Another tool, again, and that training is about the VL2 Storybook Creator, which is also a tool in and of itself. And then a third thing that we have available are the ASL literacy activities. And again, these are free of charge. All we ask that you do is register, and you'll get sent a whole week's worth of content every week. So we have like worksheets that you download. Each of these are based on one of the Storybook apps. We have quizzes at the end of the week. So we've put together a couple of activities that will help sort of fill a child's educational programming during the week. And we started doing this at the beginning of the pandemic because with schools being closed, deaf kids being sent home where we don't always know that they have a language-rich environment, we started to make these materials. We know that there's at least 3,500 or so families that started using it, and they're still out there and still available. So those are some answers to that question, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're winding down on time, so I want to be mindful of everyone's time. But for those of you who can stay on for a few extra minutes, we're going to keep the conversation going just to make sure that we can get some of these questions answered and just make sure we're finishing strong. But I think there is a question that's specific to Canada, but I know that you work in a global context. So maybe if you can share for the global audience that's on the call today, what resources you might have globally, what Motion Light Lab is doing in an international context, and maybe for those who are global, how they can get in touch or learn more about the work that you're doing abroad.
Definitely. So I think the easiest thing to do is just go to our website. We've got contact information there. So that's the quickest answer, but also globally, something that we have are called co-labs. This is where we kind of help to stand up another lab in a different country so that we can work together on a storybook app or other project. And we've worked with people in a number of countries by now. And the aim of that is to have really an exchange, both for capacity building and learning the tech stuff on the back end of the storybook apps, but really also for a cultural exchange. And we start these collabs not by us reaching out to them, but by there being people that are local that reach out to us when they have enough people, they have enough interest, they sort of create their own team and then reach out to us. What we usually do is start with one storybook app. We'll talk about which story we would like to do, whether it's an original story from that culture or a translation. They'll produce it in their signed language and also in text. This is really an opportunity to get access to folklore and fables that are part of oral traditions in different cultures that deaf children need access to too, because it's such important cultural knowledge. Or it can be an original story. So, I mean, sky is the limit when you're doing something creative like that. So we'll first develop a story in that country's signed language and written language. And then what we do at ML2 is then translate that into ASL and English. And the intent there is to create a global digital library of hundreds or thousands of books that include storybook apps that include stories from all over the world in different cultures. Our storybook app, our first storybook app was called The Baobab, and it's been translated into at least 10 languages now. I know just a little over 10. So if anyone's interested from other parts of the world and reaching out, please contact us and we'll get you connected.
Thanks. I'm seeing a few requests for Melissa's link again, and link to her website, and we'll be recirculating that as well. So make sure that you're keeping an eye out for that. I'll do one last audience question, and then we can close out with some big, exciting questions. But I think we're seeing a few kind of connected to your relationship to children's literature, authors, publishers. And so I'd love to maybe understand and hear from you just about, are you connecting with, these publishers, or are you prioritizing deaf authors, for example? And maybe just walk us through a little bit of what authorship looks like with Motion Light Lab.
Certainly. So with the training program that I described, we really do encourage participants, all of them are deaf. We encourage them to come up with their own original stories. A lot of them already, they come to the training program with some ideas. A lot of them work at schools for the deaf or programs that educate deaf children. So they usually come to the table with some ideas, and we just provide the support and a platform for them to further develop those stories. So we do focus on that because part of it is that we want to grow our pool of creatives and just really help people get their foot in the door of, creative employment, if you will. And then we also have, I know that there's a whole vast world of publishers and storybook apps. So we do have some contacts, and we've had some communication with them, but nothing that's as robust or fully underway like our training program. But I know that there are certainly many amazing stories out there that could be just as rich if they were told in ASL or a signed language. And it would be great to expand the number of resources like that that are available.
Definitely. That's great. Well, I have some closeout questions. So the first, and I think we're seeing some audience questions about the future and whether it's social media or the future in general. And so my first question to you is, what are you excited about? In 5 years, 10 years down the line, what do you hope the future of Motion Light Lab and deaf culture looks like in Melissa's eyes?
That is a big question. Let's see, the future. For the lab, I see us continuing to grow and making space for more people to come on board by way of mentorship, training opportunities, working in collaboration with people in other countries. So that's how I see the lab, just continuing to grow. And then what excites me, I definitely see a future in the 3D landscape. I think the future is 3D and digital. I think we're going to see a lot more content in signed languages, and that really excites me. A world in which TV and other forms of mass media are going to have signing characters, videos, etc., for all ages. And that includes everything from gaming to apps to entertainment more broadly. Signing avatars are something I would like to see in the future. What we've seen so far with signing avatars were very computerized. The movements were very stiff and non-human-like, but now the technology has advanced to a place where the movements and the appearance of these avatars are much more authentic. And I think that this can open up a lot more opportunities. In saying that too, we have started a network called CREST, CREST. It's short for Cultivating Research in Cultivating Research and Equity in Signing Related Technologies, CREST. So that's a network of people that are already working on or are interested in working on sign language recognition, computer vision, technologies that pertain to signing. So AI, machine learning, deep learning, and looking at the role of deaf people in that, because I think this is going to be a huge area for deaf participation, representation. So we wanted to create a space that really brought together the deaf community, emerging talent, and people who are already in the industry. So I'm pretty excited about that. We're actually going to have a festival this summer. It's going to be virtual, still online. But that will be a festival that will bring together some leading experts in the field. We already have a great lineup of speakers. And I think that is really being driven by the idea that the more deaf leadership there is in the design phase, which is so important, I see there being a role then for more stories, more content, and I could see that just really being everywhere.
Thank you. And to close this out, I imagine we probably have a few folks who are part of the hearing community on the call. And I think to kind of bring it back to the very top of our conversation, when we were talking about increasing deaf representation, deaf access, creating more bridges between, ASL, deaf and hearing communities, I'd love to kind of walk away from this conversation with a final understanding or better understanding of what hearing communities and quite frankly, all of us could do to be more inclusive and accommodating and welcoming towards the deaf community. So anything you might want to share there?
The first thing I think of is that really that's the kind of thing that's a process. It's not the kind of question that has a one-off answer. It's that you have to be committed to a process. So for example, take something like disability policy, if that were the topic, or educational policy or law or what have you, you always have to think about who's at the table, who's in those discussions, who's affected by those discussions. And if there's no one who's being affected by the discussion in the room, so for example, if there's no deaf people in the room, then that in and of itself is something that should make everyone say, well, we need to put a pause on this and get a deaf person in the room, because we're the ones that live the experience and want to see a better future for future generations. And I think that by having a seat at the table is how things get better. So that's my first initial thought, is like, how many amazing conversations are happening out there that are driven by good intentions, but still end up presenting challenges if there's no one in the room who's actually going to be affected by these sorts of policies. So that's, I think, my first reaction, is to make sure that you bring the right people together. And then more broadly, I think it would be really cool if everyone just learned like 2 or 3 signs, even just hello. I think that making that little bit of effort really opens doors, and it can be fun. I mean, on Instagram or Twitter, people have started following deaf people. So you could do something like that, just see the kinds of things that deaf people talk about, what they're putting out there. I think the world is really interesting, and human diversity is amazing. And we're at a point where we have more access as a whole than ever. because of social media. So I think even more things are possible. You can explore any kind of interest that you have, and that can really take us further. But again, that takes me back to my first response, which is that it's always a process. Thanks for asking that.
Absolutely. Well, we have much more access thanks to social entrepreneurs like you who are really, again, pioneering and leading these efforts. And I think everything that you shared was just so insightful and such a wonderful way to finish out this conversation. But for those of you who are here, just make sure you're checking out Motion Light Lab, the ASL app. Those are both fantastic resources to start learning more ASL, and support your local ASL interpreters, your classes, and just make sure you're learning and enjoying this space. It's really such a beautiful, wonderful community. And Melissa, thank you so much again for taking the time to talk to us today about everything that you're doing. It's been such an honor and a privilege learning more about you and your work and having you as part of the Ashoka community.
Thank you. Thank you really so much. This was a lot of fun. It was fun to be here and to have this conversation with you, Kennedy, and to talk about the topics that you brought up. Hopefully anyone that watched us today feels free to reach out or find us on our socials, Instagram, Twitter, or even just send us an email. Any of that would be welcome.
Thanks so much. And for one last little piece and reminder, we hope that you all found some insights to carry forward from today's conversation. Speaking of today, this is a weekly conversation every Wednesday. So we have some conversations coming up about motherhood as a master's, as well as Indigenous cuisine and the future of food, and much, much more. So be sure to check out the links in the chat where you can sign up for more conversations with some of our leading social entrepreneurs. And last but not least, make sure to look out for an email with highlights and a link from today's conversation. But again, thank you all so much, and we'll see you soon.